Hello and welcome to the Raw podcast. I'm your host for today, James Copley. I'm joined by my colleague at the Sunderland Echo, Joe Nicholson. Joe, how you doing, mate?
Yeah, good. Bit tired after last night's game, but we'll go again on Saturday.
Indeed, games coming thick and fast for Sunderland. Sort of recap the Bristol City and the Rotherham United games. Joe, obviously a draw and a loss. Sunderland dropping down to 8th at the moment, so outside of the playoffs, currently on 49 points. Watford have climbed ahead of them in 7th on 50. Luton Town 6th on 50. Millwall 5th on 50. Obviously, those teams separated by goal difference. Then you've got Blackburn Rovers on 52, and then there's a bit of a gap starting to open up between Sunderland and third place Middlesbrough on 57 points. I thought, Joe, the Bristol City game in isolation wasn't actually a bad result. The first half performance was poor by Sunderland standards, but then they came into it. I thought a point was a fair result. Then coming into Rotherham, obviously games in such quick succession with such a small and young squad, bit of a learning curve perhaps, and I don't think the season's over for Sunderland yet by any means, but just slightly maybe in danger of petering out, which is what we don't want. How do you see it at the moment?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned there, the table is extremely tight. I think if Sunderland had won last night at Rotherham, they'd have been up to 4th. And now they're 8th. So it just shows you how kind of congested that part of the table is, and that's what kind of made the Bristol City result, conceding that last minute penalty. You thought if they'd have seen that game out and got the win there, and then you're going away to a Rotherham side that hadn't won in 5 league games, they were looking in a very good position. But then the performance against Rotherham last night, it was a disappointing one, particularly that first half, and it was a performance that you felt was probably coming at some stage, not because Sunderland had been playing particularly badly, just because with a young squad playing so regularly Saturday, Tuesday, and with the injuries they've got with the likes of Corey Evans and Ross Stewart out, you felt like there was going to be a performance like that where the team did just drop off. And I think we saw that in the first half against Rotherham, where the hosts were kind of first to the kind of 50-50 balls, won the physical battle, and it was really difficult for Sunderland trying to play out from the back and to break out of their own penalty area. They did improve a bit in the second half, but it was too little too late as they were trying to mount the pressure on after going 2-0 down, got the one back with Joe Geldhart, and that was probably the one positive from the night at the New York Stadium. His performance, I thought it was his best performance in the Sunderland shirt, as I'm sure we'll come on to. But overall, it was a frustrating night, and I think it was just maybe a game too far, and we saw how kind of stretched the squad is at the moment. But as you say, it's still well in the conversation. I think they're only, a point off the playoffs with 15 games to go, is it? Maybe slightly less, 13. So yeah, they're still right in that mix. But as you say, there are a lot of teams in there that will be hopeful of getting in that top 6.
I think maybe what got lost in the lead up to this game when discussing Sunderland and Rotherham was Rotherham really needed that win. They go up to 20th on 36 points now. There's a bit of a gap opening up between Huddersfield Town, Blackpool and Wigan, who occupy the relegation spots. The gap's now at 5 points, obviously with the likes of Blackpool and Huddersfield changing manager recently, and Wigan actually, you'd expect them to get those manager bounces, and Cardiff City, they've had a manager change as well, actually. So, I think Rotherham needed that. Maybe that's something we hadn't considered, just how much they would be scrapping for things down at the bottom end of the table, because we just sort of looked at the league positions. And I'm not saying we discounted Rotherham as in our coverage or as a fan base, but I just feel like maybe we didn't really think about the opposition and what they could bring. Talked about the opposition and it being a frustrating night, Joe. What did you make of the refereeing decisions? There was a couple of big calls. There's been a lot of chat around should VAR be introduced to the Championship after a couple of recent decisions against Sunderland. What have you made of it recently?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of kind of Sunderland players complaining to the referee at the end. I think the main one was obviously that goal that got chalked off at the end, Elise's goal. When I first saw it, when the keeper goes down, you do think the keeper has been fouled, but when you watch it back, it does look like he's just run into Luke O'Nien, who's not really kind of done anything to knock him over. And then Elise's put the ball in the net and the whistle was already gone. So obviously Sunderland players and the coaching staff are understandably frustrated about that. I think the other frustrating thing was the amount of time that was getting added on, and this is not the first time we've seen this. We've seen this before. I don't think it's just Sunderland. I think it's kind of all around in the Championship or in the Premier League or in English football. We saw it at the World Cup, didn't we? They were adding on kind of 10, 11 minutes because they were adding on every stoppage in play. But in kind of the domestic leagues, they're not doing that. And there were 6 minutes added on last night at the end of the game, even though there were 10 substitutions. Both sides made 5. There was a lengthy delay as one of the Rotherham players got treated for an injury. So the Sunderland coach staff weren't too happy with that, thought that there should have been more added time on as well. So, but I think obviously the main frustration was the late goal. But I don't think it kind of hides the fact that Sunderland were, particularly in the first half, second best. And it did look a game too far for them, but they could probably feel that especially the late goal, maybe went against them.
Yeah, I think the rules do state in regards to a goalkeeper that they are to have not the benefit of the doubt. That's the wrong word, but in terms of collisions, they're to have the sort of the right of way. I think it's phrased, but when you look at it, he's just ran straight into him. And how much protection a goalkeeper's going to get? Is it going to be goalkeepers deliberately running into defenders from a corner because they know it's going to get given the other way? It seems nonsensical. I thought Tony Mowbray, actually, I don't know how he sounded in the flesh when you were there, Joe, but reading his post-match comments, which you can read on the Sunderland Echo, he seemed to display a hint or a flicker of annoyance at the officials for the first time that I can really remember during his Sunderland career. It's not really his style, not something he really does a lot, is it?
No, I think it's clearly a frustration that's built. It's not the first time he's been frustrated with referees, and as we've seen before, kind of the Sunderland coaching staff have gone over to the fourth official and asked why more time hasn't been added on or have questioned decisions. But as you said, in public, Mowbray doesn't usually kind of blame the officials and blame that as an excuse. And I think it was the same last night. He just kind of accepted that his team weren't quite at it, gave credit to Rotherham that they were the better side. But clearly, I think he felt that goal should have stood, and Sunderland maybe should have come away with a point. But as I said before, it doesn't really hide the fact that I thought Rotherham were the better side and deserved to win last night.
What are your feelings on Sunderland's season going forward and how it's going to pan out? Obviously, I think when you lose, it's frustrating, especially to Rotherham when they're down the bottom end of the table. With all the greatest respect in the world, Rotherham obviously got promoted last season ahead of Sunderland. But there's been a lot of good work done this season, a lot of good football played, electric football at times, some great moments. And as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, Joe, you just don't want this season to sort of peter out and then the lasting memory of it to be bad form towards the end of the season. For me, I really hope they can sort of pick it back up and at least be in the conversation. I wouldn't want the drop off to be too sort of stark, although I could sort of not forgive it, but I could understand it given the small squad, given the amount of football that's been played, the backlog of fixtures due to the World Cup, the inexperience in Sunderland side. Where does your head sit at with all of that? Am I maybe being a bit too negative there?
I just think, to put it in perspective, I think at the start of the season, you look at kind of what we were predicting, what fans were predicting, and there was a stat at the start of the season. I think Alex Neil really brought it up, didn't he? That kind of got it in early, that no side that had been promoted, I think it was the last 4 years, had finished above 15th. Yeah. So it just kind of shows you how hard it is to make that jump from League One to the Championship. Now, understandably, Sunderland probably have a higher ceiling than a lot of those sides. Well, they definitely do. You look at the likes of Rotherham and Wigan, the other two teams that came up, but they're really struggling down near the bottom of the table. Wigan and bottom. Rotherham obviously got that big win last night. So you look at Sunderland compared to the other promoted teams, they've made the step up incredibly well. And the fact that they're even in the conversation for the playoffs, I think, shows kind of just what a good job they've done. And the other thing is, looking at the long term, I think the team that finished the match last night against Rotherham, the average age was just above 21. So it just shows you that these players, should get better as seasons goes on. So it shows you that Sunderland are in a really good position. I'd have, at the start of the season, probably expected more games like last night, where they have been kind of outfought and just had a really disappointing evening, but there haven't been too many of those. I think this was their first defeat since the Swansea game in January, their first away defeat for even longer, I think, since last year. So it shows what a good run this side has been on. And as I said at the start, you probably expected a performance like this to come a little bit sooner, just because of the squad being stretched and how young this side is. So I think a little bit of, just to put it in perspective from the start of the season, I think they're definitely overachieving, and we probably expected more performances like last night at the start of the season. But it's a testament to the team that they've not done that, and they have been on a great run.
I guess the hope is, Joe, in the second half of the season that the likes of Ekwa and Lahaji, Gelhardt himself, maybe even Abdullah Bar start to come to the fore a bit more. Jefferson Bennett as well, like the players that came in the summer, like Elise. Obviously, these players don't have pre-seasons behind them. Ballard coming in as well, and I guess the hope is that we sort of see them making more of an impact towards the back end of the season. With Gelhardt apart, obviously, because he's on loan, with a view to sort of really pushing for the first team and the starting 11, come next season.
Well, I think that's where a good position that Sunderland are in. So they're not in the relegation battle. They're not in danger of going down. And they can now, I don't think people would have expected really for the club to go up and be challenging for promotion. If they sneak into the playoffs, then that's fantastic. And you'd never not want to go up. But the fact now that they are in a comfortable position in the Championship, and they maybe now can give these younger players more game time, as you say, people like Barr, like Ekwa, like Bennett, because they are hopefully going to get better, and they were signed as long-term assets. And we've seen, for example, someone like Tri Hume got signed last January, and we've seen him gradually be dripped into the first team. And I know he made that mistake against Bristol City, but he's been excellent in recent weeks, and we've really seen him kind of come on. And we saw this time last year when we had brought in players like Clark and Roberts. It took a while for them to get going, and now they're first team regulars in the side. So the fact that Sunderland have now got an opportunity to maybe in these remaining 13 games kind of bed in some more of those younger players that they have signed on long-term contracts, give them some more first team experience and exposure, and then that will only serve them well for next season.
Absolutely. I want to talk about Joe Gelhardt. From what I've seen of him so far in his 5 games in a Sunderland shirt, I like what I see. I think the problem lies in that he's trying to fill a hole which was caused by Ross Stewart's injury. Completely different players. They make very different runs. Gelhardt likes to drop a little bit deeper, whereas Ross Stewart really likes to stretch defence and his sort of lateral and diagonal runs, even into the corner flag, really stretch defence. I don't think that's Gelhardt's game, but he is very intricate. He can sort of drop deep. I saw him getting written off against Bristol City after that game, which was harsh, given that he'd had a good couple of chances in the match previously and been unlucky, hit the bar, just nicked the outside of the post as well. He got his goal last night, but I guess from the outside looking in, it felt a bit like 2 steps forward, 1 step back for him, because Sunderland lost and he actually missed another good chance, didn't he? I think he's probably going to come good for Sunderland. And another sort of caveat to his arrival at the club has been that, yes, he's a young, up-and-coming, hungry player in the mould of Abdullah Bar, Mishu, Ballard, the like. But the difference is he's not actually our player. And the circumstances in which he was brought into the club were to aid Ross Stewart, but now he has to be the man that replaces Ross Stewart for the rest of the season. So I feel like it's a really tough gig for him. But I think he's actually coping quite well, and I think we'll see him come to the fore, hopefully, in the next couple of games. I mean, there is a reason. I know you have to take things that club figures take with a pinch of salt at times, but Christian Speakman mentioned it. Every club in the Championship wanted him. There's a reason for that. There's a reason he went to Leeds as a highly rated teenager. There's a reason he's played in the Premier League for 30 games. People point towards his goal record. I think he's only got 4 senior goals, but perhaps not an out-and-out goal scorer. And very early on in a fledgling career, I'd be interested to see how many goals Ross Stewart had at that stage of his career. I don't think it would have been many more. But I think he can come good. What have you made of him, tactically and performance-wise?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned at the start, that he's a completely different player to Ross Stewart, isn't he? He's not your kind of taller striker that can hold the ball up, can win headers, can run in behind, and he's been asked to play that role I think when Sunderland signed him, I would have ideally wanted him to play off Ross Stewart, and I think that would have been very exciting to see how those two would have linked up. But he's now been thrown into that role of leading the line, and even Mowbray admitted last night it is a big ask for him to kind of play week in, week out when he's not been playing regularly at Leeds, and you can't underestimate that either. As I said before, this time last year, Jack Clark and Patrick Roberts came in, and it took them a couple of months to really get going. And look at them now. Now they're two of the first names on the team sheet when everybody's fit. So it is going to take time when you've not been playing regularly at Leeds like Gelhardt hasn't. I thought last night was his best performance for Sunderland, even though Sunderland were beaten. I think even though he missed a couple of chances, the fact that he was getting those chances, I think was a positive thing.
Yeah.
I thought he took his goal very well with the header. There was another one which was ruled out for offside. He forced a good save from the goalkeeper in stoppage time. So the fact that he was making those runs and his teammates were finding him, I think that was an improvement that we've seen on the last couple of games. And I thought his link-up play, as you mentioned there before, is pretty good. When he drops deep, he's kind of a good technical player, but now he's starting to get those chances in the box as well based on last night's game. So hopefully that can continue, and he can kind of, as his teammates kind of figure out the runs that he's going to make, he's going to figure out where he can kind of receive the ball from other players, from your other attacking players like Roberts, Pritchard, Clark, Ahmad. I think hopefully he can now kick on now. Now he's got a goal, but it's not really a surprise that it's taken him a couple of games to get up and running because he's kind of been thrown in a very difficult situation, I think.
I think you've nailed it there in terms of looking at Robertson and Jack Clark and how long it took them to bed in. Even Ross Stewart, to a degree, when he came in, people were sort of thinking, why have we signed him when we have Wyke, and he's not really the type of player that we need. And I think it just speaks towards the nature of football and of life generally, where and when you're playing Saturday, Tuesday, you need people to come in and make an impact. And when you're hovering around the playoffs, you desperately want that. But I think everybody wants everything now, and I think that's sometimes unrealistic when it comes to young players. Take like me and you, for instance, in our jobs, it took us a long while to get up to speed. You maybe got up to speed a bit quicker than me, but it's the same in football and it's the same in life, isn't it? You need time to gel, to learn your colleagues. But again, on the flip side of that, Joe, is that it is only a loan move, and when you come in January, you sort of need to make an instant impact. But yeah, I think he'll come good. Sunderland are next in action against Coventry City away on Saturday. Another sort of quick turnaround. The schedule gets a bit slacker after that with a week in between games. It's sort of a little bit of a mini rivalry, Coventry, another away game. How do you see that one going, Joe?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how many changes Mowbray makes. Again, he made 3 last night. He changed the 2 fullbacks, brought in O'Nien and Sirkin, and also brought Pritchard back into the side. I'd expect him to bring Roberts back in. He went to the bench on against Rotherham. And perhaps, he should have started. He made an impact when he came on, but he was a player that had started 7 games in a row. And also you've got to remember with Patrick Roberts, I think he's had 2 bad hamstring injuries. So Sunderland wouldn't have wanted to kind of overload him too much and have another serious injury. But I expect Roberts to come back in against Coventry. Maybe Elise will come back in at left back and Hume at right back. But as we've said before, the squad is pretty stretched, and it's kind of now coming to an end of this consecutive midweek matches. So then that'll be good for them to have time after the Coventry game, maybe a bit more time on the training ground. And that's where you can probably integrate players like Gelhardt, the new signings that have come in, kind of give them a bit more time to kind of get used to how Sunderland are going to play and work with them a little bit more, because it's been a lot of travelling, a lot of games, 2 games a week pretty much for like the last 3 or 4 weeks, basically, and a lot of long kind of trips down to London as well. So it'll be good after this Coventry game that the schedule does kind of slacken off a little bit, but I think we're expecting another tough game. I think we saw how good Coventry were at the Stadium Light. I know a lot's changed since then. It was the opening game of the season, wasn't it? But we saw what a good side they can be. We kind of saw the step up from League One to the Championship in that game as well. They have a really informed striker in in Gokarex, who's started scoring again. So
Yeah, very good player.
It will be a really tough game for them. But we'll see how they can do it. Sunderland had been on a great run up until last night's game against Rotherham.
I think having some time on the training ground is key, as you say, Joe. Casting my mind back to earlier in the season when Mowbray started talking about Robertson Diallo, I just couldn't see it in my head. I was just like, saw it experimented with a couple of matches and thought, nah, I can't see that happening. But the worked on it on the training ground, and it's flourished into a beautiful partnership. Really, you hope that can happen with Geldhart and perhaps they can get out of this mini poor run of form that they're on with some work on the training ground. Last one, Joe, but I know he didn't get on yesterday, but Pierre Ekwa, do you think he's far away from his first Sunderland start? Obviously, January recruit. Just thinking of the timeline of these new players and how long the club likes to take before sort of throwing them in, because they don't want to throw them into the deep end. So sort of guide them towards first team football. Would you say he's a potential option to start, or do you think he's a way off yet?
I think we will see him start before the end of the season. How soon that'll be, I'm not quite sure, because it's a position that Sunderland are light in, as we mentioned before. Neil and Mishu at the minute seems the first choice partnership. We've seen O'Nien come in there as well in the last few weeks, but I don't think Ekwa's too far away. I think he came on at QPR and did quite well. He's got that kind of physicality about him. Maybe a bit of surprise he didn't come on last night. We saw Pritchard drop a little bit further back in midfield when Mowbray made the substitutions, but I definitely think we'll see him start a game or a couple of games before the end of the season. But as you said, it takes sometimes a while for kind of the club or Mowbray to trust these players and throw them in. We saw that with Barr. It took a while to get his first start. Mishu, I think he didn't start a game until December, and he's now at a run of games. So I'm not quite sure how far away he is, but certainly when he's come off the bench, he's looked like he can handle it. It's a different thing though, isn't it, starting a game? So we'll see.
It is. Just on Barr, you mentioned there, Joe, where do you see his best position? Because I thought he was sort of an out-and-out midfielder in the same mould as maybe a Dan Neil, but a bit more of a ball carrier. But Mowbray's mentioned him as playing further forward as a sort of long-term Ahmad replacement. And he seems to have been brought on in a number of different positions in his Sunderland time. If you had to nail one position for Barr, what would it be at the moment?
I would say a more attacking position from what I've seen. When Sunderland first signed him, we kind of heard that he was more of a deep lying midfielder, didn't we? But from what we've seen, I think when he came in for that first start in that Cardiff game and he was played in centre midfield,
it looked a bit lost.
It didn't work, and that's not to write a player off. I think how old is he? 19, so that he could still kind of have a career in a deeper midfield position. But from what we've seen, he's been much better further up the pitch when he can get the ball and kind of drive forward into the opposition's penalty area. So, but I think with a lot of this Sunderland squad, they are very versatile, and I think that's a good thing. They can kind of interchange positions. They've got a lot of technical players now, and I think that's good when they can rotate positions. So you wouldn't really want to nail down one position and say that's the only position he's going to play. But certainly from what we've seen, he's been much more effective in that kind of more advanced midfield position.
Yeah, interesting times. Will we have a preview pod before the Coventry game? Do we know yet?
Hopefully we'll try and sort one out. Yeah.
No pressure, Joe. The higher ups will be on to you now if that podcast doesn't come out.
Yeah, it will be.
Right. Yeah, I think that just about brings an end to it. This podcast is available on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. All of that stuff goes out live, and you can listen to it back or watch it back on all good podcast platforms and YouTube as well. Joe, thank you for joining me. We'll have the preview pod, hopefully, that Joe mentioned, Tony Mowbray's next press conference coming up, and everything in between, including the Coventry City game, full coverage of that as well. Thank you once again for listening.